Hello and welcome to my channel, Autism Therapies. My name is Melinda and I'm a mother and I'm also a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I have two sons that have high functioning autism. Now, one thing I noticed is when I first had my kids diagnosed with autism, or even just had questions as to whether or not they even had autism, it was very hard to find out a lot of information. And then when I did find out things, since they were higher functioning on the autism scale, it was very hard to figure out what were things that I could do to put in place to kind of help them make up some of the skills they were missing. Even dealing with the emotions of what it feels like to be a mom with high functioning autistic kids, knowing other therapies and other modalities that I could do to kind of assist my kids. So I decided to start this channel so I could assist other people if they have questions of, first, is my kid autistic? What does it look like? What are things that I can do to offer to help my kids that they're autistic? How do I explain autism to my family? What does it look like when I go on trips? And just all those other questions that we have dealing with the whole general autism diagnosis. So I figured I'd start this since I'm further along in the autism journey, so I could offer up tips and tricks and things that I've been through to kind of help you along that way. In this first video, I wanted to talk about just even what made me realize that my kids possibly had autism. What were some of the things that I saw? What were some of the things that they were doing that made me feel like, I can tell something's off a little bit, but could it possibly be autism as opposed to something else? If this sounds like something that's interesting to you, then please continue to watch this video, and please also consider subscribing to my channel, as I'm going to be putting out videos once a week answering all the questions you have dealing with high functioning autistic kids. Well, autism is defined as a neurodevelopmental condition of variable severity with lifelong effects that can be recognized from early childhood, chiefly characterized by difficulties with social interaction and communication, and by restricted or repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. What does that mean in layman's terms? A lot of times autistic kids have problems identifying and regulating their emotions. They also have problems in social situations. Kids that tend to be more severe and are lower the autism scale, a lot of times do not meet developmental milestones. So they're not walking on time, they're not talking on time. They struggle to express things and they tend to get upset easily. Well, the struggle that I noticed in my kids was that they actually did meet developmental milestones, and they were doing things a lot of times on time or maybe barely behind the normal range. So it wasn't like a clear cut, oh yes, they definitely have it, but they don't. But at the same time, I did notice certain things about them were different socially than other kids. Now, one thing that actually did super help me in my situation was the fact that I actually have triplets. I have identical boys and a girl. And so I was able to compare my kids, not to just same age peers, but also to an actual sibling, same age, that's developing with them, to be able to see, were they meeting the same milestones sister was meeting, or were they meeting things differently? So what were some of the things that I noticed in my boys to make me suspect that they might have high functioning autism? The first thing I noticed was that they were very fixed in their routine, and that they were very rigid and they did not adjust well to change. And if there had to be a change, it had to be something that they had to know about in advance, or they would struggle to adjust to that change. So for example, taking my kids to daycare. If there was a certain teacher they were used to being there at the daycare, and then all of a sudden get there and that teacher is out that day, it caused a major meltdown and a major issue. This didn't bother sister at all, so that was something that I noticed as well. She could walk in just fine and be fine, but Andrew, for example, if I could even get him to go into the classroom, you can forget it. It would destroy his entire day. He had a hard time dealing, he had a hard time adjusting. And not even just that morning, but the entire day was thrown off because of that one change that morning. And so that was something we noticed that was very different with the boys as opposed to sister, and also peers their age. Another thing I noticed was that they had a hard time processing sensory information. You know when you go to the public restrooms and there's those automatic toilets and they make noises? A lot of kids, my daughter actually thought they were kind of funny. She liked the way they sounded, but not the boys. Even if I gave them advance notice that the toilet was gonna flush, it caused issues. They would cry, they would cover their ears and cover their eyes. Something about the noise was too much for them. Another thing that I noticed with Andrew was that he was extremely sensory when it came to certain types of foods. He didn't like cold textures, and he almost had to touch his food before he would put it in his mouth, because certain textures he didn't like the way they felt. And again, this is something that didn't see with sister, didn't see with peers, so it also made us kind of wonder. Another thing that we noticed with the boys was that they had very repetitive behaviors to how they did things. And so when they played with certain toys, they played with it in a certain way, and they had to line them up in certain patterns. Andrew with his construction cars lined cars up in certain ways. You couldn't mess with it, you shouldn't touch it. Jason's very particular about where certain things went in his room, certain patterns where certain things had to be. If somebody moved something of his or took something from where he had it, again, major meltdown, major disruption in their day. Both of them also had a fixation on a certain item. For Andrew, it was Gecko from the PJ Masks. We had to have Gecko everywhere we went. I don't care where we went, if you didn't have Gecko, then it would cause a huge meltdown. There were times where if we went to visit my parents who live about 45 minutes to an hour away and came back home and realized we forgot Gecko, we're driving back to Arlington because you're not going to bed. It's going to be a meltdown until we get Gecko back. That is how much he would fixate on this particular item. Another thing that we noticed, and this was a big one as well, was that they struggled with their emotions. So if something was bothering them, instead of being able to express, I'm upset, or this is bothering me, you would get a meltdown. You would get some, or these kind of like grunts or noises or whatever the case was. Oftentimes it was because they were not able to verbalize what was bothering them. And this again is something we noticed thanks to having sister being their same age. Sometimes even just asking, for example, Jason, how was your day? He would automatically go into a fit. I'm upset. And we're like, Jason, I'm just asking a question. The problem was he did not know how to articulate and put into words how he felt about the day. So the fact that he didn't know how to put words to how he felt, it would cause him to melt down and break down. And again, it was problems identifying and managing those emotions. He didn't know how to put words to it. So when we started lining all these pieces up, in addition to the fact that they couldn't sustain and make eye contact, they struggled to look at you, they often looked off, it made me kind of wonder, okay, these are a lot of things lining up. And at the same time, thankfully, I was also in school learning to be a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner at the time. And I was learning about autism, and that's when I was reading through the symptoms, and I was kind of like, hey, this sounds like my kids. Maybe not as extreme as some of these kids, but they sound like my kids. So when I started seeing these different symptoms, it caused alarm in me and caused me to go back to my pediatrician to see, is it just because they were born preemies, or are these things that we should actually be concerned about? And should we see about getting them tested and actually diagnosed with autism? All right, on the screen here, I'm gonna list all the rest of these symptoms of high functioning autism. And again, my kids didn't have all the symptoms, but based on the things that I saw, it kind of raised concerns in me. One thing I do want to point out, just because you do notice maybe your child having a couple of symptoms or even all the symptoms, doesn't definitively mean that your child does have autism. But it might mean you might want to have a conversation with your pediatrician to know if you need to do further testing. Or it might be able to help you if you've kind of had that question in your mind, something's off. Maybe it can kind of give you some clarity to know maybe this is a direction you might want to go for in the future. All right, I hope this video has been helpful and giving you some education about autism, and especially high functioning autism. I feel like a lot of kids fall between that gap of they do have something off, but they're not enough to necessarily meet full criteria for autism, or they barely qualify for autism. So a lot of times those children kind of get missed. So I just want to shed some light so we as parents can be better equipped to identify these kids, but also offer support for them as well. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and make sure to share with other people who you feel like might benefit from this material. I'm going to be uploading once a week, so please make sure to come back next week for future videos. And thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.